Welcome to Voicing Asian American Actors, a podcast with Asian American actors chatting about the actor's life in and out of the spotlight. Here's your host, Ben Gonio.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome again to Voicing Asian American Actors podcast with Ben Gonio. This is episode 5. I'm thrilled. I just want to get right to this because I am really excited to have our guest. He's an old colleague of mine um, from our Carnegie Mellon days. And I had the honor of getting to know him. We were at that school at a very interesting time where there was so much formidable talent that's now. I mean, if I mention these names, you would recognize some of this talent. Anyway, a little bit about Tom. He's a puppet artist, designer, and director based in Chicago. And his work explores the synthesis of manipulated objects, miniatures, and figures with the language of film and animation. He grew up in Hawaii and studied traditional puppetry in Japan. His collaborations with Japanese master puppeteer Karyu Nishikawa the fifth and Akutagawa have toured the U.S., Japan, and France. Mr. Lee has performed as a puppeteer in War Horse on Broadway, Madama Butterfly at the Metropolitan Opera, and the Queen of Spades at the Lyric Opera. He's the recipient of multiple Jim Henson Foundation grant awards for his original puppetry work and is co-director of the Chicago Puppet Studio and Chicago Puppet Lab. Tom teaches puppetry design and performance nationally and internationally. And more information about Tom can be found on his website at tomleeprojects.com. That's tomleeprojects.com. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor to have Mr. Tom Lee. Tom, can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can, Ben. Thanks for having me. So excited to speak with you today.
Oh my gosh, it's a thrill for me to have you here. I was just telling the folks listening and watching that we kind of we got to know each other at Carnegie Mellon when we attended. I believe you were a senior and I was a freshman. Was that you graduated in 1994, right?
Actually, 1996, I believe.
96,
Yeah.
96.
Yeah.
And I just remembered that time as you led some of our dynamics class, I believe. And do you remember what it was that you led? I think you taught some Tai Chi classes as well, as warm
Yeah.
ups. Yeah, yeah.
It might have been at that time at Carnegie. I'd gotten into Tai Chi. I even went to Taiwan for a summer to study with my teacher between like semesters. So that was really great.
Wow, wow. Well, let's jump into it. Thank you for coming on. I have some, in the work that you're doing, all interesting work. I've been kind of watching your work, all very interesting work. Um, I wanted, and I was reflecting on this last night. What can I ask Tom? I mean, I'm sure he's probably been asked a lot of these, so I want to try to see if I can at least stump you, but with these questions. But all right, here we go. The first question I have, Tom, is what was the moment or event that made you decide that you wanted to pursue the performing arts?
Wow, well, it's that's a big question. I feel like throughout my whole life, just growing up in Asia and then in Hawaii, that I just got exposed to a lot of really interesting like performance traditions, non-Western traditions. But at my little core, I was kind of a geeky theater kid.
Right.
And so in high school, I was doing all the musicals. I was doing all the typical things that you would do in a high school drama program.
Right.
But at the same time, I feel just like in the amazing multicultural soup of Hawaii, I
Mm-hmm.
was seeing a lot of really interesting cultural performances and just traditions from all over the place that
Right.
I didn't really recognize when I was growing up. But
Mm-hmm.
once I went to the mainland, I
Mm-hmm.
realized how rich base and like foundation they were for me.
Mm-hmm.
And so I guess that's the thing. There wasn't really a moment where I'm like, wow, I've got to be a performer.
Sure.
Um, I I actually, to tell you the truth, I was a bit of a kind of shy performer in
Mm-hmm.
some ways.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
But it was at Carnegie Mellon that I began to not only like really hone the performance and acting craft,
Mm-hmm.
but also begin to get exposed to just a whole variety of other art forms,
Sure.
visual art, painting, photography, filmmaking.
Wow.
And so I was always kind of interested in a lot of different things in addition to performance.
Right.
And in terms of my career path, that's been the really, really exciting thing. I think that interest in visual art, in design and performance, they really come together in the puppetry work that I've done over the last 20 years.
Wow.
It's really the awesome combo of performance and design. And I think that just suits my own particular crazy creative like mindset.
Wow. That is fantastic. So what aspect do you think of the Carnegie Mellon training um do you think you were able to kind of draw from in your current work? I mean, can you speak to that a little bit?
Absolutely. Like, first of all, I would say that there's a difference from between being an actor and being a puppeteer. You know,
Okay. Okay.
an actor requires you to think of your own body, your own voice, your own history as the instrument,
Mm-hmm.
and use everything that is just right here
Mm-hmm.
as the expression of a playwright's words in performance.
Okay.
And it's actually, in a way, being an actor is a form that's focused on your ego, your own ego, in a way that not in a kind of like self-important way, but in a way that you use this instrument right here.
Mm.
Puppetry is different from that because all of those same tools, all of that emotional depth has to be there, but the
Mm-hmm.
focus of it is in an object that is outside of you.
Wow.
So in a way, you're channeling all that emotional performative energy
Mm-hmm.
into your hand, into an object, into a figure that
Mm-hmm.
is separate from you as an ego, as an actor.
Sure.
And I think that was one of the first things that I had to kind of learn as a new puppeteer. It was not to act so much with Tom Lee that people were going to look at me and not look at the
Uh-huh.
puppet. You know what I mean?
Right. Right.
But as I've begun to continue to work in this form, um, the I continually draw upon the performance stuff I learned at Carnegie Mellon to support my work.
Yeah.
Breath, vocalization, movement, all of these things go into the work of a puppeteer in a really profound, incredible way. It's just that the focus is not you. The focus
Right.
is on a character outside of yourself.
Has that, because my next question was going to be, this is all fantastic. How the craft of being a puppet artist informed your work as an actor.
Yeah.
Were there any kind of revelations in your work as a puppeteer uh, that made you kind of rethink? And you touched on this a little bit about the ego. Rethink your, ever evolving process as a general actor, like say in the medium of film, TV, stage. Were there any aha moments that kind of like, oh, I'm so glad I'm doing puppet work because it's made me a better actor in this way, in that way.
Well, I think recently one of those experiences has been this project Akutagawa, which I'm
Okay.
working on with my mentor Koryu Nishikawa V, who's a Japanese traditional puppeteer.
Hmm.
And this Akutagawa is a piece in which I am not only a puppeteer but
Uh-huh.
also a narrator.
Wow.
And so I narrate the action of all the characters in the piece, as well as puppeteer the main character of the piece, who is a writer named Akutagawa.
Wow.
And this has actually been the first piece in a long time where I've had to really embody different character voices,
Hmm.
different tempi, poetry mixed with language,
Wow.
and um, and it's actually the first time I've acted on stage with puppets for a
Wow.
long time,
Wow.
as the primary voice. And
Wow.
this was really one of those kind of aha moments that you're mentioning, Ben,
Yeah.
because in working with my teacher on this, in Japanese puppetry, my teacher is trained to always pick up the nuances of the voice of the narrator.
Mm.
And I began to see in working in this piece, his first language is not English, it's Japanese.
Uh-huh.
And yet, when I would narrate and we would connect, like as a voice to a puppeteer,
Uh-huh.
I could see in his body and in his performance how deeply he was listening to what was going on and how
Wow.
he was able to convey emotional information, even coming from an actor in a different language.
Wow.
And that in turn just pushed me to go deeper, more nuanced with my performance and try to bring it to that level. So I
Wow.
think in terms of acting, that's been one of the most interesting recent kind of discoveries that I've made, that
Wow.
the craft of storytelling, the craft of the voice merged with puppetry is something that's a two-way street. You're not just a recording, press play. It's
Right.
actually an exchange of energy between performers, as all good performance should be.
Right.
So that's what I
Yeah.
would say in terms of that.
Yeah. So, um, just as a follow-up question here, uh, in the few experiences that I've had to witness some puppet theater, bunraku, can you speak just basically about uh, because I will see some performances with puppet where the person on stage manipulating the puppet is secondary. It is really about
Yeah,
the puppet. That's why they're covered. Th- their faces are almost like covered, and but then I've heard and I've seen of and heard conversations around other conventions where I think you touched on it, where now the actor manipulating the puppet also then now has space to create his or her performance now. That
yeah.
um, so can you speak to that, because it's like it seems to me that it would be it would touch on that one point that you said, you know, um, uh, be a distraction from what is happening with the puppet and the narrative of that puppet. So how do you negotiate that, and where is the trend going, or if there is even a trend in in Japan in that art form? Is there space for all of that to where the performer, the actor is not part of the thing, but the main focus is the puppet, and then now you're talking about both being in the same space. Can you touch on that?
Yeah, well, I would say, first of all, that puppetry as a form is so diverse, and there's
Okay.
so many different forms in
Okay.
which sometimes the puppeteer is visible, sometimes the puppeteer is hooded, invisible, sometimes the puppet's on stage, sometimes the puppet's obscured by something,
Right.
right? But
Okay. Okay.
I will say that there is more kind of openness in contemporary puppetry to be willing to see both things exist, both the
Okay.
manipulator and the puppet exist in the same space. And
Uh,
as you said, it might be distracting, but for the fact that with a really, really focused puppeteer and a really focused puppet character,
uh-huh.
the puppeteer offers another level of kind of way for you to focus on the experience.
Okay.
I'll give you an
Okay.
example. In the
Right.
Japanese puppet theater, back in the olden days, all
Mm-hmm.
performers were hooded.
Okay.
But as the tradition developed over the years, certain puppeteers became to be associated with certain characters, so that the audience wanted to come to see not only this particular show and this particular character, but they
Okay.
wanted to see that guy perform it. And so
Um,
what happened in Japanese traditional puppetry, particularly bunraku style, is that the head puppeteer now is often uncovered. And
okay.
also, they're not just wearing black, they're wearing like a gorgeous hakama like outfit and
Wow.
puppeteering. But
Wow.
their focus is so strong, and what's amazing about it, Ben, is that sometimes you can see the puppet figure to be in a state of extreme ecstasy or emotional power, like at the worst possible place in their life.
Mm-hmm.
And yet the puppeteer themselves is still and calm. And it's
Wow.
almost like a kind of shamanism that's happening. Like, how can this figure be so alive? And yet the
Wow.
person who's we know is controlling them is serene, calm, focusing all this energy into that figure.
Wow.
So that I think is a really amazing thing to see, and one that goes against the idea that the puppeteer on stage would be distracting.
Wow.
So just to voice that, and I think it happens a lot in contemporary puppetry, even in Warhorse. One of the things that the directors did to kind of set that expectation up for the audience was the puppeteers were all exposed from the very beginning of the play, and the
Okay.
audience was able to see that and then understand, oh, this is the way we're going to watch this now, and then
Mm.
by their own simply focus on the puppets and not on the performers. So a
Wow.
lot of it is, I think, also in the directorial framing of a puppetry performance. and
Okay.
um, and once again, there's just so many different types of forms that it's pretty amazing.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that. That just gave me chills. A lot of that, and touch on briefly on those styles. Just, I wish we had more time here, but on the bunraku style, and are there any other styles? I'm taking this to Japan now.
Yeah.
Are there any other styles in that particular country that is named other than bunraku? And just touch briefly on those and the exposure you've had with that. What drew you to bunraku? Uh, the major differences maybe between bunraku and the kind of theater that you're seeing here, puppet theater you're seeing here in the States, if at all?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I would say that, once I really became serious about puppetry, I knew I needed to go to Japan,
Mm,
because I had heard about the Bunraku style, which is a three-person puppetry form. It's over 300 years old, began in the Edo era, and is associated with some of the greatest epics of Japanese actually playwriting. Very
mm,
interesting that puppet theater would be associated with such amazing pieces of kind of poetic writing for the theater.
mm,
But I thought when I went to Japan that, like, all of Japan, and this is my own like kind of Western ignorance, was going to be Bunraku theater. But
mm,
Japan, just as much of Asia, just as all of Asia has so many different puppet traditions, from hand puppets to marionette traditions to ritual puppets to just a whole kind of like kaleidoscope of forms. And that's really what I discovered when I went to Japan, is that
mhm.
um, the practice of working with objects is much more diverse than even I expected, right?
Ah, mhm.
And this is actually where in researching Bunraku and Japanese theater, where I met my teacher, Koryu Nishikawa V.
Okay.
Because to give you an example of what he does is the three-person style, which we know as a bunraku, one person doing the head and right arm, one
Mm,
person doing the left arm, and one person doing the feet.
mhm.
That style was very prevalent, but also reached a point where it was very expensive to do shows because you need three people for every character. You know what I mean?
Right.
So
Okay. Okay.
yeah. My teacher, his ancestors 5 generations ago, adapted that style to be a one-person style. So one person operating those same puppets. And the way you do that is by the puppeteer operates the head and the left hand by means of a really ingenious contraption,
Mm-hmm.
the right hand with his right hand. And then for the feet of the puppet, Kori Nishikawa sits on a small wheeled box and
Okay.
holds the feet of the puppet between his toes. And
Mm.
so, using this system, this single person system, rolls around the stage, manipulating 2 feet, 2 arms, and the head of the puppet. And so, this style is called kuruma ningyo, or cart puppetry. And this is the style that I've studied with him and that we've used together in our collaborations.
Wow.
So that's a really the smallest, like quickest history of Japanese puppet
Oh,
theater I could give you.
oh no, no,
But it's
that's very clear for our audience. Thank you, Tom. That is
yeah,
just truly fascinating.
yeah,
You're making me want to go and to YouTube and just or anywhere resources to just find out a little bit more about it. But
totally,
thank
totally.
thank you for that. Okay, so we are at we are at 9 minutes here. So, and I want to make sure that we have a special treat for our audience here. So Tom's going to, he actually has a puppet and he's going to share with us. So it'll force those audio listeners to go to the YouTube video podcast premieres. So one last question, Tom, and then you can go into what your the puppet there. Uh, what advice would you give young folks within the AAPI community considering a path in performing arts?
That's a great question, Ben. First of all, I think you and I mentioned this a little bit when we were coming up. Getting into the arts industry, it was a lot different. There's a lot more visibility and a lot of positive change has happened in our country and in our world in recognizing the diversity of the performers and stories that are out there.
Mhm.
And I think particularly when you enter this field, I think the most important thing that you can maintain is remember why you became an artist or why you wanted to perform, right?
Mhm.
And don't let the pursuit of necessarily frivolous things like fame or like exposure get in
Mhm.
the way of staying curious, interested,
Mhm.
and passionate about human stories. You
Mhm.
know, I think in our field, and at least in my field, I've always found that the best way to stay motivated, to stay in a space that provides you joy and provides you like impetus to continue making work is to stay curious, you know,
Mhm.
ask questions, meet different people,
Mhm.
keep asking questions and keep yourself open.
Mhm.
I'm reminded of one of our teachers at Carnegie Mellon, Victoria Santa Cruz, amazing, like an
Yes.
intense teacher
Yes.
from Peru.
Yeah.
And one of the things she would always say was, "Kid, when we think it is a piece of cake, we are eating." And what she was saying was, you have to be there. You have to
Mhm.
be in the moment, and you cannot take things for granted. And
Yes.
I don't know. That's a whole bunch of advice I just threw out there of all different sorts. But I feel the that aspect of being an artist, the creative, curious aspect, openness is one of the most important things you can have.
That's great advice, Tom. Thank you for sharing that. Openness and staying curious. Victoria Santa Cruz still talks to me. Um, I,
Yes.
I actually, I actually have a puja table of pictures of folks that I revere, and when I practice my meditations, one of her pictures there, and she has the most intense gaze out of all of the kind of folks that I have pictures of there, and every time I look at her, I'm like, okay, I just got taught a lesson there. Just anyways, Tom, what would you like to share with us? We have a approximately just under five, actually 3 minutes. What can you share with us?
Oh, sure. Yeah. Well, first of all, I just wanted to bring this. This is actually a puppet that was built for me in Japan. And this is this incredible puppet head. And it is a character of a kind of samurai. You can see this amazing, like, bouffant hairstyle,
Right.
right? And these puppets are made out of Japanese cypress wood, which
Okay.
is carved out of a single block and then sliced in half so that you can install different things inside the head, different mechanisms. And so the first mechanism that's present on this puppet, can you see that look up,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
That's the first like mechanism. There's a spring there that allows the puppet to look up, and the trigger is on my finger. But this
Wow.
guy also has another mechanism of the eyes.
Wow. Look at that. Wow.
And the other mechanism effective in this guy is his mouth, so that he can.
Wow, look at that. Wow.
So it's a beautiful figure, and it reminds you that this was made by a friend of mine in Japan. It reminds you that in Asia, these are not just puppets, right? These are
Right.
really art objects, and they're created with such precision, such care and craftsmanship. The hair, in some cases, is human hair.
Mm-hmm.
The strings, silk strings, and different mechanisms inside, still but made by traditional processes. So, and you can
Wow.
see as I show here, these are the little toggles that control, first of all, the mouth and the eyes, right? And when you pull those down, that's how you operate. And this toggle here, right in the front, right
Right.
here, is what controls the neck moving back, up and down. So
Wow.
if you can imagine this head being held by a puppeteer with a whole costume on top of it, and then also the right hand that they're operating with two other puppeteers on them, you can kind of envision for yourself the incredible like sophistication of the bunraku style and why it's so influential in Western puppetry, right? And then from all of that, of course, there's all many different traditions that filtered out many different forms.
Right.
But I think one thing that's awesome, once again, and even showing this kind of example, Ben, is like Asia has never been afraid of the figure or the icon or the image, right?
Mm-hmm.
In kind of the West, I think been a point where sometimes puppets were viewed skeptically, especially as people, but by people thinking that they would be like a representation of a false idol or whatever.
Sure.
But in Asia, you can always see so many representations of figures, characters, statuettes. And I think this is one reason why the cultural life of Asia has inspired so many amazing puppet traditions.
Wow.
And so it's a really rich environment all throughout Asia to kind of study and be inspired by puppet theater.
Wow, thank you for that, Tom. Just for the audience, I mean, just the few moments that you shared with and manipulating that, what shone through really there was the care, the focus, the reverence, and the attention to detail that I think is associated with this craft, and the many mechanisms and the things that you have that puts this presentation on. Also, it seems to me takes tremendous. You have to be like Victoria, right? You have to be in the moment because there's so much happening, um,
Yeah.
and I think I haven't studied the history of it, but what draws me to particularly in the style of bunraku is the not only the reverence but this sense. It just draws you in because there is a moment to moment exploration of kind of human energy that's projected onto this and manipulated onto this object that is truly rooted in the now, the moment,
Mm.
just being here and now. I mean, there's so much presence, and you can't have presence if you're not in the moment.
Yeah.
I'm taking this vocabulary that I'm just, that I've learned from my studies in meditation, and we can go on and on about this, and I'm sure you have a lot to say about it. But just in those few moments, I'm seeing the reverence, the care, the meticulous respect for that object, that I think is also inherently part of that culture, and
Mm.
it's very calming to me to even to watch that. Um, there was one moment I have to share, and then we'll have to go. It brought me to tears. One single gesture that was around sorrow on an object just brought me to tears, and there's something very powerful about that. Tom, thank you for coming
Ben,
on.
thank you for doing this podcast. This is
Yeah,
so important to all of you listening out there. Please like follow the rest of the artists that Ben's going to bring on. It's such a pleasure to speak to you, my friend.
Thank you to our guest, and we hope you enjoyed this podcast episode. Be sure to tune in next time on Voicing Asian American Actors.